some regulators there feel that they spray too much of it on the ground. The soil can only absorb so much of the manure, and so when the soil reaches capacity, the bacteria and the other bad stuff in the manure filters through into drinking water supplies, and then when people go to their wells, they drink water that smells like manure. There was one woman told me a story of she was giving her 6-month-old daughter a bath, and she only breastfed her. She didn't drink any water, but the infant sucked the dish rag that had bacteria in it and ended up being hospitalized. A field across the street had spread manure a couple days earlier. Particularly in winter months, Wisconsin is very cold. In winter months, the ground freezes. They have to continue applying the manure because they got to put it someplace. And then if there's an early thaw, it just can seep through the ground very, very quickly.
And you write that 19.5 million Americans fall ill each year as a result of the waterborne parasites, the viruses, the bacteria.
That was a study that was done that tried to estimate how many people become ill.
20 million people.
I mean, and when you think about it, most of us who do get sick, we probably don't realize it, right? You go out, you have an upset stomach for a couple days, and you say, oh, I must have eaten something bad the other night, and you don't even think about your water because we don't assume that water contains bad things in America. And for most of us, it's just a couple of days inconvenience. But for some populations, the elderly, the young, people with diseases, or people with immune problems, these diseases, this exposure can be enormously dangerous. And over a lifetime, as you're exposed to other things, to arsenic, to carcinogens that are in water, they end up impacting our health in ways that we probably don't understand.
And what were, from what you can tell, the efforts of the Bush administration over the past 8 years to deal with some of these problems, as I'm sure EPA scientists and other government scientists were discovering the spread of the problem?
The Bush administration was notably inactive on environmental issues. Now, I will say the reductions in enforcement of the Clean Water Act started under the Clinton administration. So this isn't a purely Democrat versus Republican issue. That being said, and this has been fairly well documented by my colleagues at other papers as well as at the New York Times, the EPA under the Bush administration was notably inactive on enforcing a lot of environmental regulations. Lisa Jackson, the new head of the EPA, has said that reversing this is a huge priority for her. And so we're seeing a lot more science-based standards coming into the agency. But the problem is that, it takes a long time to build up a robust system. I mean, it's like, building a newspaper or building a company. It takes a long time to build it up. You can destroy it in just a couple of years. And so we're probably a couple of years away from really having the powerful regulation that the Clean Water Act depends on to survive.
Finally, Charles Duhigg, you've done this series of pieces. Summarize again. You were on for the first pieces, but summarize the trajectory you've taken each of these pieces and what you've looked at of the nation's water.
We started by looking at a chemical named atrazine, which is a pesticide that is the most prevalent pesticide in American waters, and basically looked at whether the EPA was regulating this strongly enough. There's a lot of new science that says that even at very small doses, this can cause, atrazine is related to or seems somehow connected to birth defects. And so the basic question there was, is the scientific system at the EPA working? And some people suggest no. Then we looked at the Clean Water Act and whether it's being enforced, and we found that the Clean Water Act is being violated hundreds of thousands of times every year, and that those aren't being punished. And so as a result, the law doesn't have any teeth. Then we started looking at the biggest sources of pollution. We looked at farms and power plants, which we've discussed. We're going to be doing a piece on sewer overflows, which is a huge source of water pollution. And then finally, later this year, we'll look at the Safe Drinking Water Act and issues around that law and whether it's working. And we're just going through the data now, but there's a lot of reasons to believe that in the last 10 or 15 years, the world has been transformed in terms of the chemicals that we can now use and that we have at our disposal, in terms of how dangerous they are at very, very small concentrations, and that these laws that were created in the 1970s have not been updated to deal with these new threats.
And in fact, I recall when I did a lot of research on the toxic toxic releases as a result of the World Trade Center collapse, there's thousands and thousands of chemicals for which there are no safety limits that the federal government has.
That's exactly right.
A very few number of them that are actually regulated in that sense.
That's absolutely right. And a number, I mean, what's interesting is that we have lived through the greatest chemical revolution in the history of the world, right?